Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we are comparing the newly released GeForce RTX 4060 with its more expensive brother from a different silicon wafer, the RTX 4060 Ti, to see if the Ti is worth the extra $100 US, or should you save the money and settle for the smaller die version? Well, before I answer that question with an extensive benchmark session, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Hetzner. With hundreds of thousands of servers spread across several locations, Hetzner is one of the biggest European web hosts and data center operators. With their strong focus on sustainability, they offer high-performance dedicated servers in their server auction. There you can find different kinds of servers, even configured ones, at incredibly low prices without a setup fee or any minimum contract period. So you can save money while acting very sustainable. Hetzner offers a vast range of server products at fantastic prices, so for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so I've got a 40 game benchmark for you covering the 1080p and 1440p resolutions. I've included 10 titles, which have been tested with both ray tracing enabled and disabled, and we have a number of recently released games as well. Now, for a very brief recap of how these two products differ. The RTX 4060 is based on the smaller 159mm squared AD107 silicon, whereas the Ti model uses AD106, a 188mm square die. And this means they are fundamentally two different products. They don't share the same silicon, so the 4060 isn't simply a cut-down version of the Ti model with a few cores disabled. That said though, as you'd expect, the 4060 is a leaner product with fewer cores and less memory bandwidth. The L2 cache capacity has been reduced by 25% to 24 megabytes, and with that you're getting 29% fewer CUDA cores and texture mapping units, though the same 48 ROPs do apply. The core boost clocks have also been reduced, though just by a mere 3%, but the same 8GB of GDDR6 memory remain on a 128-bit wide memory bus, though the 4060 uses slower 17GB per second memory, so there is a 6% reduction there to the memory bandwidth to just 272GB per second. Now, justifying these downgrades is a 25% reduction in price, but at $300 US, the RTX 4060 is still around $100 more than we'd like, which is a bit of a shame, and it's why we recommend the outgoing Radeon RX 6700 XT at $320 over either of these GeForce GPUs. But failing that, so you either don't have access to a cheap RDNA 2 GPU in your region, or by the time you watch this video, previous gen stock has run out. So the question then is the 4060 Ti worth buying over the standard 4060? Well, today we are going to find out. For testing, the CPU used is the Ryzen 7 7800X3D, which has been paired with the Gigabyte X670E Aorus Master, using 32GB of DDR5 6000 CL30 memory. As usual, we'll go over the data for around a dozen titles before jumping into the breakdown graphs, and the resolutions of interest for this one are 1080p and 1440p, so let's get into it. Starting with Cyberpunk 2077, we find the Ti model is 26% faster at 1080p and 31% faster at 1440p. It would seem that in this example, the extra bandwidth of the L2 cache is helping to feed the additional cores of the 4060 Ti at the higher 1440p resolution. That results in slightly better scaling. However, when enabling ray tracing, we see scaling goes in the opposite direction. Whereas the Ti version's 29% faster at 1080p, it's just 19% faster at 1440p. And of course, neither were able to deliver playable performance, but I suspect memory bandwidth is the primary limiting factor here. And while the 4060 Ti does have more of it, it only has slightly more. What it does have a lot more of is L2 cache, and that appears to be not terribly useful in this example. The Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 results look fairly typical, with the 4060 Ti delivering 23% more performance at 1080p and 29% more at 1440p. So some decent gains there, though it's also worth noting that the Ti version does cost 33% more, so we're not exactly seeing a full return on investment here. A Plague Tale Requiem plays a lot better with the 4060 Ti, as we're looking at a 38% improvement at 1080p and 39% at 1440p, so quite consistent scaling here, and it does make the Ti model the better value choice. The Callisto Protocol results are interesting because here the 4060 and 4060 Ti are quite evenly matched, with the Ti version only delivering 14% more performance at 1080p and then 16% more at 1440p. Now, I had thought that enabling ray tracing might hand the Ti model more of an advantage in this title, but it was quite the opposite, and now it's just 9% faster than the 4060 at 1080p and 11% faster at 1440p. Now, the obvious answer here is memory bandwidth. The Callisto Protocol has to be memory starved with the 40 series, and the extra L2 cache of the TI version is just not helping here. Truth be told though, both GPUs do technically fail this test because if you play the game for long enough, they do eventually run out of VRAM under these test conditions, and here's an example of that using the RTX 4060 Ti. Simply put, 8GB of VRAM isn't enough to support ray tracing with the ultra quality settings in this title, and had the 4060 Ti pack 12GB or more VRAM, you'd be seeing smooth, playable performance here, which I've demonstrated previously with an RTX A4000, which is basically a 16GB RTX 3070. Resolution scaling in Fortnite is very consistent using the DirectX 11 mode. Here the 4060 Ti was 21% faster at 1080p and then 22% faster at 1440p. So not great gains given the price difference, but also not the worst result we've seen for the Ti model so far. The Fortnite DX12 mode using RTFX is a little more favourable to the 4060 Ti, allowing it to deliver 23% more performance at 1080p and 27% more at 1440p. Still, not amazing results given the 33% increase in price, and performance overall was quite weak. Next up we have Resident Evil 4, and this is an interesting one. The 4060 Ti was 27% faster at 1080p, which is what I'd say we've come to expect as more of a best case scenario. But at 1440p, it was a massive 42% faster, and it would seem that the extra cache of the Ti model is helping to utilize the extra cores, as we're basically looking at perfect scaling relative to the 4060. Then enabling ray tracing sees more of this, with the 4060 Ti now 43% faster at both tested resolutions, and this is without question a best case result for the Ti model. But from best case results to more worst case results with Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, we find the 4060 Ti is just 15% faster at 1080p, though that margin was extended slightly to 19% at 1440p. Then with ray tracing enabled, we see more of the same really, as here the 4060 Ti was 14% faster at 1080p and 18% faster at 1440p, so very underwhelming results relative to the base model. Okay, so this is an interesting set of results. As we know, Doom Eternal is a very memory sensitive game, and we're primarily talking about memory bandwidth, so access to the VRAM. This is a big problem for the 4060 series and that 128-bit wide memory bus, and although performance does look very good, we're certainly looking at very big frame rates here, you can clearly see how bandwidth starved these GPUs are, with the 4060 Ti and 4060 delivering almost identical performance. Moving on to Hogwarts Legacy, we're back to what I'd say is fairly typical margins. Here the 4060 Ti was 22% faster at 1080p and 26% faster at 1440p, so still below that 33% increase in price for the Ti model. But we find some interesting results with ray tracing enabled. Again, bandwidth is a major problem here, especially for the Ti model, and that extra L2 cache just isn't helping here. In this example, the 4060 Ti is just 6% faster at 1080p and 5% faster at 1440p. So a super disappointing set of results here, and this is yet another test that really highlights the problem with the 4060 Ti. The last game we're going to look at is Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and here we have what is closer to a best case result for the 4060 Ti, with a 30% performance increase seen at 1080p and 27% at 1440p. So decent gains there, but again, not quite in line with the price increase. Right, so we've just had a look at almost a dozen of the 40 games that I've tested, some of them with ray tracing and some of them without, and now it's time to see how these two GPUs compare across all of the games tested. So let's go do that, starting with the 1080p data. On average, the 4060 Ti was 22% faster than the 4060 at 1080p. The biggest win was seen in Resident Evil 4 with ray tracing enabled, with solid wins seen in A Plague Tale Requiem, F123 with ray tracing enabled, and Darktide. Beyond that though, we're looking at margins of less than 33%, which means the 4060 is technically the better value product in over 90% of the configurations tested. Worse still for the 4060 Ti is the list of games where it's faster by a 20% or less margin, which make up almost 40% of the configurations tested. And granted, some of those titles such as CSGO are CPU limited, and maybe ACC to a degree, but most of the examples here are still GPU limited. Now, increasing the resolution to 1440p results in similar margins overall. Here the 4060 Ti was just 24% faster on average, and again we find games such as ACC, Hogwarts Legacy with ray tracing enabled, and the Callisto Protocol with ray tracing enabled are all still issues for the 4060 Ti. Okay, so is the Ti worth it? The short answer, no. And full disclaimer, before I continue, I don't think either of these products are worth purchasing at the current asking price, so the MSRP. But if for some reason you were tossing up between them, I think you'd be best off buying the standard RTX 4060 and just ignore the more expensive Ti version. As I've noted several times by this point, the 4060 Ti costs 33% more, and while you are receiving 42% more cores and 33% more L2 cache, that's where the highlights begin and end for the Ti model. The problems, on the other hand, begin when you start to pay attention to the memory subsystem. There's a 0% increase in VRAM, so still just 8GB, and worse still, it's limited to a 128-bit wide memory bus, which means there's basically no increase in memory bandwidth, just a mere 6% improvement thanks to the use of 18 gigabits per second memory. The Ti model is also limited to the same PCIe 4.0x8 interface, though that is less of an issue despite being a suboptimal configuration. And we did see a number of instances where the limited memory bandwidth was a big problem for the RTX 4060 Ti, and while this issue also held up the 4060, it was less of an issue given that the 4060 is cheaper and has fewer cores to feed. Had Nvidia not designed the 4060 Ti with such an obvious memory issue, you'd see more consistent scaling between these two products, which would result in more consistent 30 to 40% performance gains for the 4060 Ti over the 4060. Therefore, the 4060 Ti is a heavily compromised product, and again, while the 4060 makes all the same mistakes, at a 25% discount, it is a lot more forgivable, even if the value overall is still quite poor. And sadly, the 16GB version of the 4060 Ti won't solve all its problems either, as generally speaking, performance will be very similar, and although the extra VRAM will address some of the problems, even in those examples, the resulting performance will still be very underwhelming at the $400 price point. But of course, the fix will cost $500 US, so that's just another Nvidia disaster in the making. In short, the 4060 Ti 16GB would be an acceptable product at $350 US, with an 8GB model passable at more like $300, which would require the RTX 4060 to hit $240 US. Also, as a side note, pricing isn't the only issue here. Really, the 4060 and 4060 Ti should be called the 4050 and 4050 Ti, given their performance relative to the previous generation GeForce 30 series. That said, we're less concerned with product names here at Hardware Unboxed and much more concerned with price to performance. But we do fully acknowledge that Nvidia has muddled the product names this generation to confuse consumers in a bid to upsell them without realizing they've been upsold. Anyway, it looks like you can skip the 40 series Ti models if you have to buy a 40 series GPU. As the Ti models, they inherit all the same flaws as the base models, they just do so at a higher price, so that's fun. And that is going to do it for this one. If you appreciated this content, then please do give it a like, subscribe for more. And if you'd like to become a Hardware Unboxed member, well, you can do so via Floatplane or Patreon. Links for those are in the video description. You've got access to our exclusive Discord server, monthly live streams, Q&A stuff, and behind the scenes content. So some cool stuff there if you're interested, but if not, that is perfectly fine. I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.